Hi everybody. As Paul said, my name is Niels Leenheer and I am a bit of a browser geek. So, well, I should feel right at home here. So this talk is going to be a bit nerdy, but it's about browsers. It's about lying, it's about deception. But first, a bit about me. I run the 4th largest open device lab in the world with 200 different devices, which you all can use. Just come over to my office and I'll make sure the devices are charged, and it's completely free. Just have to let me know in advance. That's not a lie, that's not a deception. And I created the website HTML5 Test, which is a website for testing web standards in browsers. And, well, I record a lot of scores, a lot of test results. And those test results are, well, meaningless if you don't know which browser you are using. So I created a little side project. It's called Which Browser? It's a library for browser sniffing. So I actually want to know which browser you are using, and the existing browser sniffing libraries were not good enough. Well, if you have a score from a particular browser and it says it's, for example, Internet Explorer 11, but it is really from another browser, that test result is completely useless. So, which browser? And this talk is about browser sniffing. So, why talk about browser sniffing? It's 2016. Browser sniffing is dirty. We should all know this already. You should use feature detection. So, again, why talk about browser sniffing? People are still using browser sniffing. Clearly that message hasn't landed. I did a little search on GitHub on user agent, and well, more than 900 million lines of code refer to the user agent, and over 500 projects on GitHub deal with user agent sniffing. So clearly the message hasn't landed, and big names are still using it. And I'm not just talking about Apple, who is blocking access to other browsers from their live streams, and there are actually others, bigger maybe even, that do the same thing. Big names are not always using browser sniffing in a nice way. And some may argue there is not a nice way to do browser sniffing. Well, I don't agree with that. It isn't that black and white. But to know why, we have to look a bit about the history. So, what is browser sniffing? Well, the HTTP specification actually defines a user agent header. And it contains a string with information about the browser. So every request the browser makes to the server sends that user agent header. It looks a bit like this. When the server receives this request, it has some time to think about it. It can say, well, this guy is using Internet Explorer. Well, let's give him a simple version of this website. Or this guy is using a mobile browser. Hey, let's send him this mobile optimized website. So the browser sends a request and the server can respond differently based on the information it gets from the browser. And then the server sends its request eventually. And that is actually what browser sniffing is. That's all to it. That's all there is to it. So we're basically done right now. Well, no. There are some other things. First of all, you can access the same string from JavaScript. Simple. You just look at navigator.userAgent property, and it's exactly the same string. Well, no, it isn't. That's actually a much larger string, so that was the first lie. The user agent string on browser side can be different from the user agent string on the server side. And why is it different? Well, it's longer on the JavaScript side here because, well, it used to be this long on the server side as well, but Microsoft thought it was a good idea to save some bytes, even if it's just maybe 50 characters. It's still data saving. So you can use the user agent string to identify the browser, but also the rendering engine, the operating system, the device model, the manufacturer, processor architecture, language of the browser usually, but all of these things are optional. Even the header itself is optional. So why is browser sniffing this hard? Why is it dirty? Well, we have to take a step back in time. Things started out simple. This is the very first browser there was. Well, no, that's a lie. It's a very early browser, Mosaic. And this is its user agent string, and it's very simple. It's Mosaic/1.0. That's a token. That's how it's called in the HTTP specification. And behind parentheses there is Win 3.1. It's Mosaic version 1 on Windows 3.1. Simple. And this is Netscape. Well, it's not Netscape/1.0, it's Mozilla/1.0. Mozilla was actually the code name of Netscape Navigator. So instead of actually using the name, they used the code name, but it's still simple. But things started to get complicated very quickly. So Netscape and Mosaic. The big difference between the two is one web platform feature. Frames. And maybe you guys don't even know about frames. It's 20 years old, and realistically you shouldn't have been using frames for the last decade or so. But frames are weird. Frames are, you know, if you use frames, basically what you do, you have an index.html file which contains a frame set definition. And that frame set definition says, well, for example, the left part of the screen is used for navigation, and the right part of the screen is used for content. And this is the HTML file for content, and this is the HTML file for navigation. So the index.html file doesn't contain any information at all. So how do you create a website in frames that works in Netscape, that does support frames, and a website that doesn't use frames for Mosaic, which doesn't support frames? So you use browser sniffing. So you give the frameless version to Mosaic, and you give the frames version to Netscape. And that worked for a while, until there came a third major browser, and that one was called Internet Explorer, which did support frames, but wasn't called Netscape, wasn't Mozilla. So if you had a lazy web developer that said, well, let's give the frames version to Mozilla only, Netscape, Internet Explorer, didn't get that frames version. And the frames version was actually preferable because you didn't have to send the whole page every time you navigated to a different section of the website. You only had to send the content, and the navigation stayed the same. So we had slow connections in those days. So it was actually far better for users to use the frames version. And when Microsoft was testing Internet Explorer, the first version, they noticed that they weren't getting that better frames version. They were getting the slow and old Mosaic frameless version. So they had to think of a solution. And that solution was lying. They said they were Mozilla 1.0. The solution to a problem is always lying. But in this case, this worked, because those scripts thought they were being accessed by Mozilla. And of course, they said, well, we're not actually Mozilla, we're compatible with Microsoft Internet Explorer. Yeah, okay, it's lying. This worked. But fortunately, this was not necessary for long. Because, well, eventually people started to get really boring with creating two different websites. So they just created the website with frames and thought, well, if you don't have frames, just upgrade your browser. So later on, Opera, well, they didn't need to say their Mozilla. They could just say Opera. Opera 8 in this case, 8.54, and they didn't need to lie. Great. But they actually had another problem. They were the first to reach double digits. And if you are a lazy web developer and only look at the first digit after Opera slash, this is Opera 8. This is Opera 1. And websites started breaking. If you had a website that said, well, you need to use Opera 8 or higher to use this website, which was pretty common technique those days. Best viewed with and that kind of stuff. So this was Opera 1. And yeah, Opera had to think of a fix for this. So they released Opera 10.10 and said they were Opera 9.8. Another lie. But they did say they're Opera 10.10 in a new token, the version token, right at the end. So this worked. And we have these kinds of situations all over, all the time. And this is, for example, Firefox, which used the Gecko token, which is the rendering engine of Firefox. And instead of a version, they thought it was a good idea to use a build date. This is the date this rendering engine was built. That's a pretty bad decision, because if I take the source code from this rendering engine, this exact version, and create a new build today, it's going to say 2016. Yeah, when people started using that build date to determine if the browser supported certain features or not, that caused a problem, because, yeah, the date doesn't say anything about which version it actually is. So Microsoft thought it was a bad idea, and they decided to drop that build date and just make it a fixed date, 2010-1-1, February 1st, 2010. And this worked. Developers were forced to use other things to determine if a browser supported certain features. And they thought they were going to use feature detection, hopefully, but realistically people started looking at the RV tag, which actually contains the version number of the Gecko engine. So Firefox thought, well, what the hell, why not just use that version number as the Gecko token, and well, that's something they should have done all along. Okay, it gets worse. This is Safari. The user agent string of Safari is pretty complicated, and that's because it's, well, first of all, they decided not to use the version number of Safari in the Safari token, but a separate version token. Why? I don't know. But anyway, the most strange thing here is the KHTML like Gecko, because Safari isn't based on Gecko, it's based on WebKit. WebKit is based on KHTML. This KHTML is explainable, but why like Gecko? Well, at the time, we had two major browsers, Firefox and Internet Explorer. And Internet Explorer was pretty bad, didn't support standards, and Firefox was the latest, greatest thing and did support standards. So, lazy web developers thought, well, it might be a good idea to send the standards version to browsers that say they are Gecko. And Safari wasn't Gecko, but they did want to have the standards version. So they said, well, we're kind of like Gecko, and it worked. And then we had Chrome, which was based on Safari, and they kept that whole user agent string because they wanted to be like Safari, and wanted to be like Gecko, and so on. And they just added their own Chrome token with the version number. Fine. Then we have Opera again, which started using Chromium and added again their own token. Well, not the Opera token from the older versions of Opera, because people might think this is an old version of Opera. No, they created their new Opera token. It worked. And actually, Internet Explorer started also supporting standards. So they encountered the same problem. How do you get the standards version of pages and not the backwards compatible Internet Explorer version? Well, first of all, drop the MSIE token. That's a sure way to get the old version. So they drop the name of the browser entirely, and they say they're like Gecko. And it worked up to a point, but websites were still giving Internet Explorer, well, the old versions of the pages. So with Edge, they decided just to adopt the Chrome version of the user agent string and say they are KHTML like Gecko, Chrome, Safari, all things together at WebKit, but with Edge. And that works. But it's all lying in deception. And those were actually relatively normal user agent strings from normal browsers. And that leads me to the second law of user agent strings. User agent strings only get larger over time and never smaller. And that's actually a lie, because we just saw Firefox did get smaller, but anyway. This is the user agent string of Samsung Internet. And it's actually pretty weird, because it is almost exactly the same as Chrome. This is almost exactly the same as Chrome 28 on an Android device. But it isn't. This isn't Chrome. This isn't Google Chrome. This is Samsung Internet. And how do we know it's Samsung Internet? Well, the Chrome user agent string doesn't have that version /1.5. That's the only difference. Because this is a Samsung device, that we know, and it's Android, and it's Chrome 28 in combination with version 1.5, we can absolutely be certain this is Samsung Internet. So, user agent sniffing isn't just looking at the user agent string and determining what it is. You have to have special knowledge. You have to actually know about this stuff to determine what browser it is. And sometimes browser agents contain things that just does not make sense at all. Like this one. This one says it's a Lumia 800, which we know is a Windows Phone device, but it says it's Series 40. Series 40 is an operating system created by Nokia for dumb phones. So why does it say Series 40? Because this browser is actually a proxy browser that was first created for Series 40. And when they released it for Windows Phone, they forgot to update the user agent string. Yeah. This is LG Netcast, which is television. Does it say it's a television? No. Does it say it's LG? No. Netcast? No. This is just Safari on Linux, and that doesn't make sense. We have to know this exact user agent string, and well, if it's this user agent string, it must be LG Netcast. That's what makes user agent sniffing difficult. And sometimes browsers actually include compatibility mode or desktop mode. And they deliberately try to fool browser sniffer scripts. Like, this is Opera on Linux desktop, version 11.5. Well, no, this isn't Opera on desktop. This is Opera on mobile, because that ZBOF there, that's actually ROT13 encrypted mobile. And yeah, this is actually what most user agents sniffer scripts do wrong. They don't know this. And this is Internet Explorer 8, of course. Who sees something wrong here?
Trident version.
Yeah, Trident version. Internet Explorer 8 shipped with Trident 5. Well, no, 4. This is Trident 5. So this can't be right. This actually isn't right. This is Internet Explorer 9. And it's running in compatibility mode, and it just says it's Internet Explorer 8. So it's lying. And then it is possible to change the user agent string yourself. Just download an extension for your browser or just developer mode. You can change this. And so we have to deal with these different things like spam. This is actually a real-world user agent string. Yeah. And we have XSS tags. Because user agent strings tend to end up on statistics pages, so people try to hijack it. And My Little Pony.png, that's actually this one. Pretty cute. But still, it's the XSS attack. And then we have funny people. Well, the bottom one, that's somebody trying to flip over a table. And the first one, Internet Explorer 10 on CPM, well, that's completely ridiculous. And the middle one is actually a bit of a story, because HTML5 test is, well, it's used not only by web developers, but sometimes by employees of certain phone manufacturers. And they sometimes visit the website with phones that are not yet released. So there are certain websites that want to scoop certain new phones, tend to look at HTML5 test very closely and see if any new reports appear on it. And somewhere last year, the Microsoft Surface phone appeared. And I don't know if it's a real phone or just a joke, but it got reported on some scoop websites. And immediately, not even 30 minutes later, all kinds of weird user agent things started appearing with people trying to fool the system, and this is one of those that actually is a joke. But they were trying to make fun of those websites reporting the Surface phone has been cited. Yeah. And then we have angry people. And if you don't like profanities, please look away for a few seconds, because, well, angry people are angry. So, here goes. These are actually real-world user agencies I personally encountered on HTML5 test. And I did a quick test with over a million different user agent strings, unique user agent strings, and I counted how many times certain words appeared. Like fuck, or yes, or vagina, or balls. 4 times. So, user agent strings cannot be trusted, and everybody applies. So, once again, you should never use browser sniffing for controlling access to your website. And you should never use browser sniffing for determining browser capabilities. And you should never build your own browser sniffing library. Of course, I didn't follow my own advice, but I'm a bit of a browser geek. So what is it good for? And this picture is especially for those who think there are too few cat pictures in this presentation. Thank you. So what is it good for? Well, if you know the platform or the browser, you can streamline the user experience. And one example for it is this page. This is a download page for Firefox, and there's one big green button. And if you visit this website with an OS X computer, Mac, it downloads the Mac version. If you visit it with a PC, with Windows, it downloads the PC version. The user doesn't have to think about which version he has to download. He doesn't have to look at a list with 10 different versions for 10 different Linux distributions and 32-bit Windows version or 64-bit Windows version. He just has to click that one button. That's a far better experience. And of course, if you do want to have a different version than the one you're getting with the free download button, there is this link at the bottom. So you can get to the other versions if you want to, but for most users it won't be necessary. And if you know your users, you can build a better site for them. So if you want to know if you can drop Internet Explorer 8 support on your website, you can look at analytics, and maybe that's something very useful, because if you don't have to spend time at making sure Internet Explorer 8 works on your website, you can spend time on other things. And one other good thing about browser sniffing, you can do error logging. You can listen to the on-error event handler and send stuff to the server. And if you know which browsers are causing JavaScript errors, for example, you know which browsers to fix. And of course, there are also some things that, well, are a bit of a gray area. Well, they're pretty bad, actually. Like this article appeared on Mail Online a year and a half ago, and there's this one line. Hotel prices can vary dependent on what device you are using. So if you try to book a hotel room with an iPhone 6, you're probably going to pay a bit more than somebody with a low-end Android device. And I don't know if that's actually common practice here in the Netherlands. No. Nope. But it's something that, well, some people may find interesting to do. So, and then nothing happened.
Sniffing. Sniffing.
Sniffing. Yeah.
User agent not known.
Quick, tell a joke.
Nothing happened.
Shall we help Bruce?
Oh. There it is again. All right. So, if you want to use a browser sniffing library, just make sure that it is regularly updated. And check if it's possible to schedule automatic updates so you can avoid the problems people had in the past. And try libraries like UA Parser or Public Device Detector, or of course the best one, which browser. Okay, but please don't use Wordful because it's outdated and slow and just not any good. And there's actually a project that allows you to compare the different user agent browser sniffing libraries. It's called user agent parser and has a demo page where you can just pop in your own user agent string and check how well it does on all those libraries and see how easily some are fooled. So I want to leave you with a quote from Gandhi. If you tell a big enough lie and tell it frequently enough, it will be believed. And this is actually a big problem for web developers because these little lies have effects. So if you want to know if you can drop Internet Explorer 8 support, well, that's nice, but how do you know your analytics package does its user agent sniffing correctly? How do you know those Internet Explorer 8 users you're seeing right there are actually Internet Explorer 8 users and not Internet Explorer 9 users in compatibility mode? You don't know. And if you need to buy a phone for testing the most used browser on Android, how do you know that which browser that is? Is it Chrome or is it Samsung Internet that looks like Chrome? You don't. So these little lies do have repercussions. And this one is actually also a lie, because that's not Gandhi, that was actually Adolf Hitler. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So what do you think the initial reason was for browsers to expose their user agent?
It's part of the specification. And people thought it was a good idea to let the server know which browser you are using to be able to do this kind of stuff. And at the same time, I didn't mention that, but the server actually does the same thing. It also sends a user agent string back. It's not called user agent, it's called server, but it actually does actually the same thing. It's, it says, for example, it's Apache version this on Linux, whatever. And that one is actually far less usable than user agent string.
I have a question. The slide with the swear words. I'm really curious how often the word bot appears.
Bot?
Yeah,
I can try to find out.
that would be awesome.
I know there are a lot of bots that actually say they are bots. They actually have a user agent string with bot in it or crawler or whatever. There are certain, you can look at those particular words, but there's also some other things you can look at to determine if it's a bot. But sometimes bots just try to mimic a regular browser and there's no way to tell.
Because they lie.
Because they lie.
Another question. So the user agent in JavaScript is in a navigator object, right?
Yeah, navigator.userAgent.
Yeah. And there are a lot of other things in navigator objects there as well.
Yep.
And you can also access the OS and things like that. How often do browsers lie about that? That's the same thing, or?
Well, there are certain things in the navigator object that are defined by the HTML standard to be a lie. The HTML standard says you have to have this particular answer on certain properties. And I can't think of one on the top of my head, but I think most of the browsers have to say they're actually Mozilla somewhere. And if you don't do that, you're just not following the standard. It's lying by standard. Yeah. Right.
So going from Gandhi to Hitler to a puppy, were you trying to take us on a journey? Because I went places.
Yeah. Well, it was a presentation filled with lies and deception, so I thought it was fitting.
Okay, thank you very much.